Okay, so we started recording. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome, everyone to this special MLN roundtable discussion on the topic of uh, essentially Gaza and the question of uh, what can we do more for Gaza. So this is more of a roundtable discussion compared to our usual webinars. And as participants flow in, of course, we would like everyone to have their opportunity to engage as well with members of MLN and also with each other on the topic. So I'll just let this few people come in. But let's some ground rules on the way that this conversation is going to go. While I would like to advocate for this open discussions with everyone, there will be some degree of moderation for the sake of managing any potential interruptions or things like disruptiveness. So I would like to encourage everyone to keep their comments civil and succinct. So in this situation, the chat feature itself is enabled, but participants, if you would like to speak, you will not be able to unmute yourself directly, but if you would like to speak, please use the reaction bar to raise your hand and the moderator will be notified. And on the discretion of the moderator, you'll be allowed to speak and share your thoughts and your opinions as well. And also, once again, please refrain from any unwarranted and disruptive behaviors that would interfere and interrupt the meeting. And with that in mind, we hope that this discussion will actually bring forth fruitful engagement on the topic of what we can do for Gaza and on to address the current situation that's unfolding in Palestine and is between Palestine and Israel. So with that in mind, I would like to pass the floor to Professor Pape to lead and moderate the discussion. Professor Pape, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hassanel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and those of you who would watch it later after the recording would be available. The idea of this webinar, or this roundtable, as Hassanel said rightly, this is not a webinar, it's a roundtable, was to try and be a bit more effective in our discussions about the meaning and the orientation of solidarity with the Palestinian people in general and the people in Gaza in particular. It's very clear, given the events of the last few days, that there are aspects in the development in the region and even global developments that are beyond the reach of activists and nonetheless would have impact on the reality in Palestine in general and in Gaza in particular. So these kinds of dramatic events, such as the Iranian attack yesterday on Israel and the possible Israeli reaction to it, are definitely factors that would eventually also impact the reality on the ground, but as common citizens of the world, without the positions of influencing policies directly, we can in an outfit such as the MLN analyze these developments rather than influence them. So this is not a discussion of how do we react as MLN to the Iranian position, Israeli reaction to it, or even the American policy and so on. These are developments beyond our reach, and they will have an influence. And anybody familiar with the way apartheid fell apart in South Africa would remember that there were developments beyond the reach of the ANC or the solidarity movement with South Africa that had influenced the situation in South Africa. For example, the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War prodded the United States to change its position on sanctions on South Africa. Now, it was not the result of a successful pressure on the United States. It was the result of a different strategic perception of the reality in the post-Cold War era by the United States, and yet it had an impact, not an exclusive or dominant even, but a very important role to play. And I feel that what we are watching now, the escalation in the Middle East into a regional war, which to my mind seems to be inevitable now, where Israel and Iran would be the main clash, the parties that would clash in a direct confrontation, of course, would have immense impact on the reality in Palestine in general and on Gaza in particular. However, from the history of decolonization and post-colonialism, we know that if there is no element of non-violent transformations, the decolonization itself can be very violent and create a vacuum and a void that can go on for a very long time. And despite maybe the success of eliminating one form of regime, it doesn't necessarily mean that it creates conducive circumstances for developing a better and more just regime. So I think there's a huge importance. That's my first point. I think there's a huge importance for discussing also non-violent means of helping the Palestinians in every way possible. Again, Palestinians in general, and those in Gaza in particular. As we speak, there is a series of pogroms that settlers in the West Bank are perpetrating against the Palestinians in various villages and towns. So also the West Bank is now exposed to ruthless, barbaric Israeli settlers' activity, while the Israeli army is turning a blind eye and allows these horrific attacks on Palestinian life and property to continue. So our thoughts and solidarity is not just with the people of Gaza, but of course also with any other Palestinian group or individuals who are still suffering directly or indirectly from the ruthless policies of the Israelis. So the question is, what can a group like the MLN and groups like the MLN do more to create an atmosphere in their own societies and regionally and globally to make their voices heard and make their voices an effective factor in changing the reality on the ground. Since this is a huge topic, in a kind of preparatory discussion we had before this roundtable, we highlighted 4 points which we think are worth thinking about for those of you who would like some guidance on a more focused discussion on this question: what can a solidarity movement do more for the people of Palestine in general and the people of Gaza in particular? The first point we mentioned is, and allow me to read this because we articulated it in writing, is how has the use of starvation as a weapon of war exasperated the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and what measures can be taken to ensure access to essential food, water, and medical supplies for the civilian population? This is a very important point because as a solidarity movement, on the one hand, you want to help the strategy of liberation. You want to be part of a movement that helps to change dramatically the reality in Palestine from a reality of apartheid, colonialism, and oppression to a new regime of equality, liberation, and post-colonialism. And yet at the same time, you want to contribute to the urgent needs of people. And the most urgent need for the people of Gaza is the famine that is now raging all over Gaza, which affects especially the children of Gaza and the babies of Gaza. And we witnessed the Israeli attacks on the various agencies that supply food, and every such attack stops these agencies from acting. This is what happened with the World Food Agency, and the whole political discussions between the United States, the United Nations, and aid agencies is really stuck. And what they do, they count the number of trucks that are able to enter Gaza or the number of food that is being parachuted into Gaza. Every expert on how to fight starvation and famine tells us that these are insignificant quantities of food, that they have so far had no impact whatsoever in stopping the starvation. That's one side of it. I mean, putting pressure maybe on these agencies to coordinate work, to be more effective, to pressure the governments that have these connections with Israel to do much more in opening Gaza to a more direct food supply. The other side of it is that somehow the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court have not highlighted enough, to my mind, the use of the weaponization of starvation by Israel as part of the overall framing of the Israeli action as a genocide. And I think we should ask experts to help the South African government, now also the government of Venezuela, to highlight these points, because I looked at the material and I listened to the expert witnesses also by South Africa and by Venezuela, and they rightly focus on, you know, the discourse of genocide that Israeli politicians are using and kind of military acts, but I haven't seen enough stress on the weaponization of starvation. And this is important because even if the international community will succeed, and I believe it will succeed in the near future, to force Israel to accept a ceasefire, this will happen. This will definitely happen. A ceasefire, the starvation will continue unless Israel is being sanctioned and pressured. And if you want, brought to trial, a public trial and a trial in international legal tribunals for committing the crime of genocide through starvation, because you can enact starvation without continuing your military operations. I mean, Israel did it before. The siege on Gaza that started in 2007 included incremental starvation. Israel was responsible for how many calories would people in Gaza consume by its ability to control the siege on Gaza. So that's one point that maybe people would like to relate to later on. The second point is, how do you envision a sustainable solution to the ongoing crisis in Gaza, considering the political, economic, and humanitarian dimensions of the conflict? And I think this has to do with the fact that I already mentioned that a ceasefire by itself is not a sustainable solution. And maybe more worrying is the discourse that the global north in particular is using for the day after, what it calls the scenarios of the day after. It's really a reinventing the Oslo Accord as the best way to have a closure to what happened in Gaza, namely to recreate the open prison that Israel created in 2007 of the Strip, but this time the prisoner wardens would be people who belong to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and again people would gaslight this with a discussion of a two-state solution, claiming that this is part of something that is really permanent reconciliation between Israel and Palestinians. This is totally disconnected from the reality on the ground, totally misunderstands the way Israel wants to deal with the Gaza Strip in the day after, and does not at all ensure that similar Israeli actions, not only towards the people in Gaza, but also towards the people in the West Bank and the refugees in Lebanon, would not be resumed shortly after, if this is the discussion of the the day after of the Gaza operation. Our third point is, what role do you believe media representation plays in shaping international perception of the Gaza situation, and how can more accurate and balanced reporting be achieved? This is huge, highly important. One of the reasons I think we all kind of deserted a little bit our pressure on mainstream media is because of the excellent work done by the alternative media. So the people said, okay, so I don't need to use the mainstream TV satellite stations. I don't need to read the broadsheet papers. It doesn't matter. I can always open a very good website that would provide me both with more real information and a better analysis. But when we do this, we forget that if we want to expand the solidarity with Palestine beyond the usual suspects, we have to take into account that the vast majority of people anywhere in the world are not consumer of alternative media. They are consumer of state media, of mainstream media. And there's no need to give up on these outlets as well, because when we did make an effort in the United States, for instance, or in Britain, you could see that you are influencing the language, the perceptions, the coverage on the situation. Not enough, by no means, by no means. And this has to do, and I know it from personal experience, with the fact that many of us don't like to be in the limelight of the mainstream media, because it has a certain rules that do not allow you a lot of time and space to articulate clearly what you want, and you are not always in a very friendly environment. And nonetheless, I think, and this was an old idea of mine, which I hope we can maybe discuss it even in a different meeting later. I think we need to create centers of how to educate, especially young people, how to appear in the media, how to handle the media. This is not something you are born with. It's not a natural kind of quality. It really needs training. It needs education. And I think such centers would be very, very useful in every country to make sure that people know exactly how to use these moments when or spaces that are given and not to give up on the mainstream media, because it is still the most important source of information for most people, and definitely for the political and cultural elites of many societies. And finally, the last point we thought would be interesting for discussion is, in what ways does hegemony, both regional and global, influence the dynamics of Gaza conflict, and how can efforts be made to mitigate its negative impacts? By this, I think, because the MLN is very much was born as an initiative that wanted to expand the discussion on Palestine beyond the West, into Southeast Asia, into Australia, to New Zealand, into Africa, into Latin America, South America. Because of that, it was very clear that we are having connection with civil societies in countries that so far played a marginal role in the situation in Palestine. I was shocked to hear a week ago that Indonesia decided that in order to be accepted to the OECD, I don't know if you know that, in order to be accepted, the OECD is the most kind of prestigious economic club of the West, right? The most developed economics in the world have their own club, and Israel belongs to that club. Now, if you want to join that club, there has to be a consensus of all the members of the OECD if a new member wants to join them. Indonesia has been trying for 2 years now to be admitted to the OECD. For that, it needs Israel to agree to its membership. The Israeli condition was that Indonesia would open bilateral diplomatic relationship with Israel. And the Indonesian government, a week ago, sent a message to Israel that it agrees to that condition. So we will have very soon full diplomatic relationship between Israel and one of the largest Muslim country. And I think that's an example for the struggles we need to have if we want other regional and global factors to play a role. And even if we're not part of a party or have the ears of policymakers, we definitely know about the basic sentiment in civil society, especially in the Muslim world and the Arab world, in the global South, that surely can be more effectively channeled into pressure on the governments, for example, not to take such a historical decision like this that really undermines the very good work that has been done by countries such as Bangladesh and Malaysia and some countries in Africa and South America. But we have to be aware that the machinery of lobbying and advocacy to preempt any change in the global hegemony that provides immunity for Israel is working day and night, and we should think of how to work against it. So these are some of the questions that we raise. I would love maybe to come back with some ideas, but maybe responses towards the end before Dr. Chandra would summarize. And I think the first person who wanted to join us. Is John Minto. John, if you can, in 5 minutes, kind of give us your peace of mind.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Ilan, and thank you for your introduction. I mean, the four questions which you've raised, the four issues really which you've raised, each one of them is a huge topic in itself. My feeling, my contribution, I think, is this: that there's the last 6 months have been a time of really intense emotional and even physical exertion for all of us in this, people who are in the solidarity movement, and of course much more so for Palestinians themselves. But I think that the most important point, I think, is that through all of that, we have to maintain a really clear focus on the future, because whatever comes out over the next few months, however things develop over the next few months, it's very tempting to get sidelined and see maybe there's a silver bullet here, maybe there's something here, maybe this will happen or that will happen. But I think the most important thing is that we need a very clear, determined, focused strategy and have the international community work together on that strategy. And I think that for me, the BDS strategy is the most important, because the BDS strategy is one that can, certainly the boycott and divestment can involve civil society around the Western world, and that can result in enough pressure to get sanctions put on by governments, so that in future there's a far greater pressure on Israel, far less room for Israel to move, if the people of Western countries such as New Zealand are really putting enormous effort into boycotts and divestment and pressuring our governments for sanctions. And I think that strategy for the solidarity movement outside of Palestine, it's the most important contribution we can make, and it's one that we should really focus on. So the two things that I'm going to say that I think are really important, one is that there are campaigns such as having Israel thrown out of the Paris Olympics. And I think that, on the face of it, that's a really hard ask. And of course it is. But I think it is an issue which touches everybody. And a lot of boycott issues don't. A lot of, if we're getting people to boycott various Israeli products here and there, that's fine, but it tends to be localized. It doesn't tend to gain attention. It doesn't tend to gain a national debate. But I think Israel's participation in the Olympics is something which every human being on the planet can understand. And when people see that Russia has been banned from the Paris Olympics because of its invasion and occupation of Ukraine, then people will see, well, why the hell is Israel allowed to compete in these games? And so I think there's all sorts of questions that come up about that. And I think intense international pressure may not necessarily involve Israel being thrown out, but it will generate a huge amount of discussion about the hypocrisy of the Western world that will add to I think the enormous damage that's been done to the global standing of the US and the Western world over their hypocrisy in the way they've dealt with Palestine. The second thing is that, one of the really encouraging things is that next month there is the first global anti-apartheid conference on Palestine being held in South Africa. And that, I think, is like the first real attempt to draw together the international community in that in support for a BDS strategy. And I think I'm talking about the solidarity movement outside of Palestine. I think our contribution, the greatest contribution we can make, is through that BDS strategy and supporting what comes out of that conference. So those are the two things that I think are really exciting and interesting. The other points you've made, Ilan, are incredibly important about the humanitarian aid that's desperately needed and how we can move on that. But yeah, my 6 months worth is to say that I think I'm really keen on us keeping a very clear focused strategy, looking at the medium term, which is through the BDS strategy. So kia ora koutou, look forward to hearing from what other people have to say.
before I move to Ranjan, I just want to say two things. One is that there was a kind of an assessment in Haaretz about the impact of the academic boycott since the 7th of October. And it seems that the impact is huge, most Israeli academics report that they cannot find anyone in friendly countries, so to speak, who is willing to cooperate on research grants, on research projects. They are disinvited from international conference on a level that was unprecedented. Before, they are asked not to send their articles to academic journals and so on. So that's one thing to pay attention. And secondly, a very important journalist in Haaretz, Akiva Eldar, which really is definitely a Zionist and so on. He wrote an article that he says that as painful as it is, he would have liked the Olympics to disinvite Israel because he thinks that's the only language that the present government in Israel understands. And that's the only way he thinks to stop the genocide in Gaza. So there are even voices from within. And that's very important to have also voices from within willing, almost sort of calling boycott us, because that's the way to do it. It's a small minority position, of course, and one should not idealize it, but it's important to know that it's not a language that is alien to everyone. Ranjan, please.
Yeah, two comments. One is on this whole question of the Olympics. I think what's important is not whether or not we succeed. I hope we succeed, but I think just the kind of awareness that will be created would be very important, because this has never been discussed. No one has ever thought that this is one of the ways in which you can do the boycott of Israel. So I think that's something that we can pick up as a strategy and as a campaign, as MLN. This is one thing that I want to say. The second thing is, you started with Ilan with the whole politics of starvation. And when we read about the World Central Kitchen being, being bombed and stuff like that, how true is it that Israel is actually against the World Central Kitchen? Because, Galan actually was the one who took the decision to starve Gaza, but he also welcomed plans to have the World Central Kitchen bringing aid into the territory under an Israeli supervised maritime corridor. Now, this also, and the UAE is also a part of this. Now, the whole question is, is this a backdoor attempt to destroy or minimize UNRWA's effects, UNRWA, and have the World Central Kitchen substituted? Is this a way of eliminating the politics, the political questions that come with UNRWA's being in Palestinian territories?
Sorry. Well, I think it's important to see the dynamics of this. Namely, on the 7th of October, immediately after the 7th of October, the Israelis declared that starving Gaza is part of the collective punishment for what happened. So that was a policy, and if you remember, for 3 or 4 months, they didn't allow any humanitarian aid. And this was also a concession that Netanyahu made for the more extreme right-wing members of his government, because until today, the religious Zionist parties, which are a very important partner of Netanyahu's alliance, still say publicly that starving Gaza is the best way of getting the release of the hostages and bringing down the Hamas. I mean, they declare very openly that starvation is an important part of the strategy. Now, Netanyahu and the other members of the government, under the pressure of the United States and some other countries, began to kind of hide this discourse on starvation, and understood that if they're not going to allow some sort of humanitarian aid, they might even lose the United States as an ally. So it's not out of kindness, and it's not out of a moral evaluation of starvation as a weapon that changed the Israeli policy. It is the pressure the pressure of its own allies, actually, on the issue of humanitarian aid. Finally, and you're absolutely correct, Ranjan, actually the Israelis, but that's very typical in Israel, they can shoot themselves in the foot very often. You're absolutely right. They want to eliminate UNRWA as the major suppliers of welfare and humanitarian aid. This is a declared aim by Israel. And they think about alternatives to UNRWA. So they encourage this food organization in America to replace UNRWA, and then they bomb them.
Mm.
You may ask, how is it possible that you are bombing the people who you want to replace? But this is something that has a lot to do with the fact that you have these two political forces, and the political force that believes in total brutalization of Gaza has a lot of support in the army, especially among the officers and so on. So you will see sometimes policies that are not necessarily the ones that Netanyahu wanted, but he has no control over them, which is different from the assassination of the 3 children and grandchildren of Ismail Haniyeh. This is something not only he, the whole Israeli cabinet is for, right? But on starvation and how to deal with humanitarian agencies that Israel itself invited to replace Turkey and UNRWA and so on, they still have very strong elements in the government, in the army, that would like to continue to weaponize starvation and even attack those that Israel, in a way, invited to replace UNRWA. So this, I think, is the reason for this kind of policy. And the contradiction in that policy, as you rightly point out. Good. Muted myself, sorry. In that case, Dr. Chandra, maybe you would like to give us your thoughts on these issues. We would love to hear your input if you can hear me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Are there others who would like to express their views? Better.
For the time being, we don't have to, but if after your remarks someone would want to add, we will definitely have enough time to include them.
Yeah. Well, quick response to this thing about Indonesia, Ilan. I don't know whether this statement by the Indonesian government, the official statement, has been reported widely in other parts of the world, including in Israel and West Asia. The Indonesian government officially said that they are not making any move to recognize Israel. They're against it. Their stance has not changed at all. They've said that officially. And this is in response to this point that you mentioned, Ilan, about OECD and Indonesia wanting to get in and Israel using that as a bait of this thing. Apparently, there is an official denial, which is not highlighted. And this is something which I think is linked to another very important point that you made, Ilan, at the outset, the 4 points, the whole question of the media. I think there are a lot of lies which are being peddled to an extent by both sides, as it happens in very many of these conflicts. You noted people who are angels in conflicts like this. But I think if you look at Israel, in certain issues, it makes a concerted effort to fabricate. And that has become, I think, almost a culture. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ilan, this thing known as Hasbara, the whole propaganda philosophy, which has been part of Israeli thinking for a long while. I was shocked to read how Israel interpreted the attacks from Iran. They said that 7 out of the 10 missiles went off target, and the only creature that was affected by the attack was a cow, because the cow refused to get into the shelter. Now, I'm reading other reports, including reports from very credible individuals, actually. And these are, unfortunately, these are people from the other side. And they're saying that this has been a huge shock to the Israeli establishment and Western security elements and others that look at the overall security situation. Why? Because it seems that the extent of damage done, even though human lives may not have been lost, but the extent of damage done and the targeting, the method of targeting was so astute that Israel got the shock of its life that this had happened. I think a lot will depend on how they're going to react now. So the point that you raised earlier, Ilan, about whether it is the Netanyahu approach or the approach of the other faction that will prevail, because they are in a sort of a daze that this has happened, you know. And if you look at the way they have approached Israel, and this is something that some of us have discussed for a long while, the way in which they've approached Iran, Israel and its approach to Iran is something unique in the context of the politics of West Asia. Right from the beginning, immediately after the Iranian Revolution, the Israeli elite decided that this was the foe that they have to destroy after the Iranian Revolution. For, I think, a variety of reasons. And I want to mention very quickly, if I may, 4 reasons why I think the Iran-Israel dimension of the conflict in West Asia is out of the ordinary. And it has, as you rightly hinted, very serious implications for the future, not just in terms of a regional war, but I think it is also going to have a very serious impact upon Palestine, the whole question of Israel and Palestine. One, first reason, because Iran was the country which acted as the custodian of US and Israeli interests in that region, and a very important role under the Shah. It's a very, very important role. So the loss of Iran was a major psychological blow to both Israel and the United States way back in '79. Because the Iranian Revolution took a totally different position, and that was very important, number one. Number two, Iran's oil wealth. For the same reason that they were so concerned about Iraq, because Iraq had huge oil reserves, and so does Iran. And this is something that concerns them. They know that this is a country that can fund its opposition to Israel because it has got money, it has got oil wealth. Second factor. The third factor, I think, which is very important, is that the way Israel looks at Iran, that Iran and Israel, more than any other country in West Asia, knows this, that Iran, right from the beginning, had given a lot of emphasis to the development of its scientific and technical basis. And this is Iran's strength, actually. Not highlighted very often, that scientifically, Iran has really developed over the last 30, 40 years. And that is something which Israel fears. It's something that Israel knows is a game changer. The moment you have to deal with a country, you're not dealing with Saudi Arabia, you're dealing with Iran. They know the value of science and they know the importance of mathematics. I mean, this is very deep in the Iranian psyche. It is in their DNA, this whole question about science. And Israel is very concerned about that, to put it mildly. And the last point I want to make is, I think a lot of analysts have argued that what Israel also fears is that, unlike Iraq, which had some of these assets, including science and oil, but what Iraq didn't have was an ideological force behind the state, behind its key players, an ideological force which manifested a very high degree of commitment, and that is rooted in religion. It is rooted in Islam. whatever one may say about things that are happening here and there, especially things that are done by some foolish groups within the Islamic establishment. But I think deep down, there is a very, very profound commitment to Islam. And that is what drives them. This is what brings someone like Muhammad Khatami together with others who are part of the establishment. The establishment hates Muhammad Khatami or some of the others, but on the question of Islam as the defining ideology and the importance it provides to the entire notion of identity and revolution and change, I think that is something which is special. And I think Israel knows that too, that they will not succumb very easily. So this conflict, if it does happen between Israel and Iran, will be a game changer, would be really a game changer. In fact, Israel, again, if you look at it from another perspective, Israel is also concerned by the fact that if you look at all the other groups that have come up against Israel, they all link to Iran. Whether it is the group in Yemen, or the group in Syria, or the group in Iraq, or the group in Lebanon, they all link to Iran. And what is very significant is not all of them are Shia. In fact, Hamas itself is Sunni, also linked to Iran. It is Sunni. So you see, Iran has, in a sense, overcome the Sunni-Shia dichotomy in the Muslim world in confronting Israel. And Israel has, in a sense, helped to bring the Sunni-Shia ideological dimensions together, partly through the way Iran is perceived by some of these actors, including Saudi Arabia and others. They've really strengthened something which they never wanted to. It is something that has happened unwittingly. So the point I'm making is that I think it would be very interesting if we are thinking of how MLN can respond to the situation. I was just wondering, friends, if we couldn't put across this message more forcefully than it has been done before. A very important message that has emerged in the last 6 months. Number one, that at the national level, at the level of Palestine, there is no way you're going to crush the Palestinian movement. And I'm not using the word Hamas deliberately. It is the Palestinian revolutionary movement. It is the Palestinian resistance that we're talking about. If Hamas is destroyed tomorrow, some other group will emerge. And that group will also be totally committed to opposing what Israel is doing. So the point I'm making is this national resistance is not going to go away. And that message, I think, has to be conveyed not so much to the Israeli citizens who have got a certain mindset, from what we have been reading from various sources. I think this message has to be conveyed to Europe in particular. Europe, more than even the United States of America, that national resistance is not going to succumb. They're not going to yield. That will get stronger and stronger. And now that we hear that there are very serious moves by Spain and Ireland to recognize Palestine as a member of the United Nations, and they're trying to do it collectively together with others, I think that's very significant. I think we should push for this. These are very important developments. Recognition of Palestine, recognition of the Palestinian struggle, and this message that the Palestinian struggle, it is not Hamas, it's the Palestinian struggle. It's not going to go away. And I think we're very foolish of this appendage to US power, meaning by which Europe. We're very foolish of Europe. It'd be stupid of Europe to bet on the United States and Israel in a situation like this. It's not going to help their future. And I think that message has to be conveyed very strongly. That's at the national level. At the regional level, a message that is linked to that, that at the regional level, if there is a regional confrontation, it is not going to be easy for Israel either. Israel will not be able to deal with that sort of regional confrontation. Iran, together with the others and other countries where the people support this sort of resistance to Israel, not the governments. I'm talking of Saudi Arabia, maybe Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and so on. The leaders may look at things in a certain way, but not the people. I think people's resistance has grown tremendously in the last few years, and especially in the last 6 months. They would never, ever want to allow for Israeli dominance of the region in any way. And they don't want the United States to continue to play this game. And I think the United States has lost a lot of capital. It has lost a lot of goodwill. because of what it's doing. It's really foolish. And I think certain elements within the US establishment realize this, that they cannot continue with this blind support for Israel. It's not going to help them. So I think this again is the message that we should get across. Don't continue with this blind support. It's not going to help you. The world is changing, both at the national and regional level, and certainly at the global level. At the global level, I think we know that US dominance has declined and it will continue to decline. If anything, the crisis of the last 6 months has eroded even further US's global standing. And I think that's the message that we can get across. If we can overcome the hurdles, and some of the hurdles are in the media. Ilan was right when he talked about, somehow we'll have to get it to the mainstream media too, because that's what a lot of people still read, unfortunately. So the media is one of the things that we have to focus upon. If you go back to the 4 points raised, the media we have to focus upon, and I think we have to get this point across that a large number of media personnel have been killed. Again, this has not been emphasized enough. The massacre, we use the word massacre, of media personnel has never happened on this scale in the entire history of the contemporary world, the way in which they've been killed. And the other thing is, added to that, something very similar, the way in which medical personnel, doctors, have been killed. When I talk to people, even in a country that is so far away from the cockpit of conflict, I find that a lot of people are just totally astounded that a country can consciously embark on the killing of doctors, the way it has happened. What had happened in Shifa, what had happened in the other hospitals. I think this again is something else that we can try to convey to our friends everywhere. So I see MLN's role as countering the sort of distorted narratives that are emerging, establishing some other way of looking at the situation which offers hope for the future, because the future actually means recognizing the rights of the Palestinian people, and that we should not forget is the ultimate goal. It doesn't matter whether it is one state or a two-state solution, which is unworkable, but what is important is, I think, putting across this message that the rights of the Palestinians have to be recognized at the end of the day. So when we tell Europe, for instance, this resistance is not going to go away, we have to convey this message. The resistance is not going to go away unless and until you recognize the rights of the Palestinians. And the rights of the Palestinians in the ultimate analysis will have to be decided by the Palestinians themselves, not by people like us. We can discuss, we can debate, we can analyze, but it is the Palestinians. And the quintessence of those rights would be, of course, the right of return, the rights of the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem. I think this sort of message, which we have already been articulating, we have to do it in a much more forceful manner. Thank you. Thank you, and the friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandra. When you were talking, I thought about the fact that the Western media has either intentionally or unintentionally totally missed the Iranian explanation for what they were doing. They said clearly, we are not looking to kill people in this reaction. They said it very clearly. We want some material damage to the Israeli military bases, but more than anything else, this is just a show of force, what we can do. Because Israel has broken the name of the game, the rules of the game. So here is what it's kind of an alert threat message, much more than an operation. And that's why days before the operation, the Iranians already talked to the Americans and explained exactly what they're going to do. And it's like so different from the way Israel treats collateral damage, what it calls collateral damage, where it doesn't, all its actions, there's no whatsoever consideration to the killing of civilians and so on. This was from the very moment to the very moment it was operated, declared as something which is not meant to hit civilians. And that's the way, that's the kind of technological acumen that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Enable them to do that. Enable them to do that. And I think that's very important, you know, this, how to deal with the images, the demonization in the Western media.
Yeah.
And the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And change the narrative. It's a battle of narratives.
Yeah.
And say, really, who's the one who is responsible player? Who is the one who is responding to attack? Who is the aggressor?
Yeah.
And so on, because, you know, it's very easy to portray an Islamic Republic as an evil base that only initiates operations for killing non-Muslims and so on. And of course, for that, we need space. We need space, we need knowledge, we need dissemination and so on. But I think you're absolutely right, Chandra. This is so important to put the myths aside and give people the reality, and juxtapose them and show exactly the fabrication. And the fabrication is both the narrative and the images and the adjectives and so on. So I think this is a hugely important. And yes, MLN has the capacity of, not by our own people alone, we have enough connections with very good people who can really do that kind of job for surely. We can do much better and do that. We have few minutes, and Professor Junaid, who joined us, Junaid Ahmad, joined us a bit later, but I think he heard most of this. So we will be very pleased to have you, and then Ranjan, and then we'll have to close the meeting because we all have other things as well to do. So Junaid, please, if you can do it in 5 minutes, and then Ranjan in 5 minutes, and then I can close the meeting. And thank you so much, Dr. Chandra, for this very important guidelines for all of us for the future. I'm sorry, and Laila says that Shah Hakim also raised his hand. So maybe Shah, if you're still there, and would like, so maybe we'll begin with a guest, and then we will move to Junaid and then Ranjan. And all of you, if you could do it in 5 minutes, because we have to close it by 1:30. Yes, Shah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make two comments, real quick ones, in the interest of time. Of course, boycott, BDS movement and the boycott activities is most effective way to get attention and get put pressure on Israel and the economy and the government. And I think, unfortunately, it needs to be ratcheted up the next level. The way it's going today, it's small bits and pieces here and there, certain retail type outlets feeling the impact, but not enough to make a difference, whether to the companies itself or to the shareholders that own the companies. As you know, most of the shareholders that own the large American corporates are huge supporters of the Israel government, and the dividend flows to them is what helps with the activities. So, you know, anything, any thoughts and any ideas to move the boycott campaign up the next level would be most useful, especially on the retail end, because that is an immediate reaction and immediate decision by the consumer. That's number one. Number two, on the issue of the Olympics, I think most countries and most societies have, organizations have done what they can in their own countries, sending letters, protest and to IOC in trying to exclude Israel from the Olympics. I feel the next level up would be campaigns by each country for the countries not to participate in the Olympics, which is something easier for civil society in each country to do. Okay, is something impactful. You can imagine if all those countries that voted against Israel at the UN, for example, pulled out of the Olympics, you may have an Olympics of 10 countries. An Olympics of 10 countries would hurt the sponsors badly. In essence, this is an indirect boycott campaign for the sponsors of the Olympics. And it would clearly lose money. So if the countries pulled out, it would force IOC to really consider Israel's position at the Games. So I think if it was something worth considering, if you got all, maybe if you think it's worthwhile, communicate with relevant parties and get them to start the campaign of pulling out of the Olympics, and maybe you'll get some serious attention. Anyway, that's just 2 points from me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I think it's a very interesting idea, yes, to ask other countries to withdraw. That's a very effective way. Junaid, thank you so much, Shah, for your two important comments. Junaid, can you hear us? Where is he? Did we lose him? He said he had problem with the connection. So Ranjan, okay. Hassanan said that Leila wants to. Okay, Leila, you're next. You're next. This is very spontaneous, but we still have 15 minutes. Yes, Leila, please.
Thank you, Professor Pape and MLN for inviting us. My name is Laila and I'm based in Bangalore. What more can we do for Gaza? It can be very frustrating because, everyone is trying to do so much. And I'd like to follow on from what Professor Chandra said in terms of the huge number of campaigns and protests around the world that was widely publicized within the country and globally, because the mainstream media also covered it. So I think I'd like to highlight on point 3 of your guidelines, where you're talking about role of the media and the mainstream media, and to just extend it a little bit, because I think especially involving the younger generation in not only awareness, but they're ready to act and want to do something. So I'd like to also focus on the fact that how do we also reach out to work with our Palestinian resistant movements there, because it's very hard when I talk with my Palestinian friends and colleagues and the kind of disappointment they have over the international community. And I'm just wondering, because we lost a lot of Palestinian artists and the work of artists, that's such a huge loss, where actually, they've been working on the entire Palestinian cause and the struggle for decades. And this war has literally demolished and in fact, probably lost forever now. And I'm just wondering, your dream, Professor Pape, about involving young people in every center and training, even if MLN has access to, some key influences and actors and musicians and artists who would join in a kind of a regional-based campaign, because I think if every region is committed to this particular war since October 7th, because I think we need to keep the momentum of not only creating awareness, but advocacy and an end to this entire system of apartheid in Palestine. For instance, I have personally reached out to some artists through their websites and emails, like John Batiste and Craig Mokba, the UN Human Rights Commissioner who resigned, and also, people like Bassem Youssef, who's becoming, I know we may not subscribe to such satirical comedians, but he's becoming more and more popular. But if we have connections to these kinds of groups who would organize, even if we're not looking at a global campaign like they did in the past for world hunger and, with We Are the World and whatnot, and we don't have Bob Marley's anymore, unfortunately, but at least the weaponization of starvation and the killings, which is just, it's just too much. I think somebody mentioned, it's like mentally exhausting. I think it was John from Australia who said that the last 6 months have been just exhausting for everybody, and especially you can imagine, our Palestinian brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces and children that we have there. So I'm just wondering if MLN can actually develop a strategy where we can connect with some very powerful groups or movements who are actually dealing with or connecting with such campaign modules or resistance modules, but also with engaging with some local Palestinian resistant movements. That was just my point, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Leila. Yes, I think this, we definitely, all of us have enough contacts with the local forces in all the areas you mentioned. And but in the past, MLN also cooperated with individuals and so on. But I think you're right, this can be more systematic and structured, and definitely this is a very positive suggestion. We still have some minutes left, and Ranjan,
Yes.
please. And
Yes.
Junai will join us, but I think you'll conclude, and Junai will have a chance maybe next time, because we have to close the meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. So I'll try and read out what I've got in front of me also. You know, in recent weeks, the Israeli media has been talking about the pushing for the establishment of an international peacekeeping force to secure the Gaza Strip and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. But this might just be a cover-up for the day after, you know, and it, in a way reimposing the permanent Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip. This is what it seems like. And this international peacekeeping force, if it's going to have 3 Arab countries managed by the US, it's not going. It doesn't look. It looks dubious. You know, it doesn't look convincing at all. So they're going to collaborate, of course, with Israel in an indirect way. They're going to take instructions from the US. And in this, it is in this context also that the World Central Kitchen will rise again, you know, and replace UNRWA. And with UNRWA goes away not just humanitarian aid, but also certain political claims that they help the Palestinians to make.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely do. Oh, well, I think that, thank you. I think these are all so concrete and important ideas. And I suppose we will have an MLN meeting to digest the concrete suggestion, not just the overall analysis and discussion, and maybe carve out of it campaigns, more concrete campaigns and clear campaigns in the future through webinars and through maybe other projects of dissemination of knowledge and campaign. Thank you so much, all of you, for these for me, it was very informative and encouraging. This is a very dark moment. I don't have to tell anyone. And the little contact I still have with Gaza, which is on and off because of the lack of electricity and the Israeli actions to prevent people from using their phones. But we still manage to talk to people on the ground. And it's very clear that the first thing on their mind is our actions to start with a ceasefire to begin with, humanitarian aid. And I think that they will be very happy also to hear about long-term strategies. But I think in this, the contact will be also with other Palestinian groups. So for Gaza, it is tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, that is really very much on their minds. I do apologize for those who joined very late and want to join us, but we started late and we have to finish. We have other engagements and webinars and so on. So I do apologize. Please join us, read our website, our Facebook, and follow the announcement of the next webinar and so on. I'm sure these same points will be relevant for whatever topic we will suggest of discussing with our audience. So anyone who hadn't had a chance here would have a good chance of doing it in the future. Thank you very much. And if you can see the chat points, Hassanel has put our website and the recording of this meeting for those who join us late or those who want to hear it quietly and calmly from the beginning. The recording will be uploaded to that website. Thank you so much, all of you, and hope to see you all very soon. Some better days. Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.